Hey, everybody, Patrick Connor here, and welcome to the Knuckles and Gloves podcast. Boxing history time again. We're talking anniversaries also again. I mean, I guess it just goes to show how much inspiration we take from current events that not as much is going on. And so we're just kind of relying on the history. But that means I'm here with my dude, Aris Pina, CompuBox operator and fellow fight history fanatic like myself. What up, dude? How are you?
How's everything, my man?
Doing all right, man. I'm always excited to talk history with you. I'm always excited to go over shit that, especially this era from the 1970, like late 70s, early 80s is really fun. And that's what we're doing today, man.
Absolutely. And today, the card that we're profiling is one of the marquee ones of boxing history for a variety of reasons. The players involved in it, the results of the fights, and like you said, man, the time, place of it, of what would happen subsequently with their careers afterwards and everything like that. So what we're talking about happened today, November 30th, 1979. It was a day of an outstanding doubleheader promoted by Top Rank, which is Wilfred Benítez, undefeated, the boy wonder, defending his welterweight championship against 1976 Olympic gold medalist and darling 7-Up kid Sugar Ray Leonard, which in itself is a huge event as a fight. But hold up. Not only that, on the undercard, Marvelous Marvin Hagler, for years being called the uncrowned champion and deserving of a title shot, was finally going to get his chance against the really rough and rugged Vito Antuofermo. Couldn't get any better for a doubleheader.
I mean, just those four names, well, not even those four, just like one or two of those names is an entire podcast easily.
Mm-hmm.
But we're going to try to condense the entire event into this one. It was 43 years ago today on 1979, November 30th, 1979. So just to underscore the importance of this event, but also how much things have changed, how different things are in terms of how boxing's received, the coverage, etc., and the broadcasts. This was on a Friday. It was on ABC. It wasn't some massive pay-per-view like you would expect today. So it was totally accessible to a lot of fans. And yeah, I mean, just that alone is pretty crazy. The fact that it happened the way that it happened. And I mean, massive event, dude. Huge event. And obviously also a portent of things to come for sure.
And the fact again, man, this to show you again the time period when this took place. This took place on ABC on free television. Fights like this, fights like Ali Spinks 2, which almost the entire country watched live on just free television. It was a whole different time. A card like Benitez Leonard on its own would be a massive pay-per-view event today that would charge you like between $75 to $80 for a pay-per-view to watch that. Or if you're going to be ringside for that, thousands of dollars for a ringside ticket. It would have everybody on boxing Twitter salivating, rightfully so. And then you add Marvelous Marvin Hagler fighting Vito Antuofermo, finally getting his title shot against Vito Antuofermo as the main undercard attraction of that fight. That right there in today's, first off, that wouldn't even be a whole card because the promoters would justify that Hagler Antuofermo could be its own main event, which it could have been anywhere else. The fact that they put it with Benitez Leonard makes it even more of a special event because both of those cards on their own, just their one fight holds weight to be their own main event, especially, Benitez Leonard. But like Hagler Antuofermo was a big fight in itself. That was a fight that everybody was clamoring for. Hagler was finally, after years of neglect and all kinds of shit that he was going through, was finally going to get, the chance to become champion. And most people felt it was going to be his rightful coronation. Antuofermo was another guy that rough and rugged, came through the trenches of the middleweight scene of the 70s, which was really dreadful to go through. Finally became champion in late 78, beating Hugo Coro and shit. Like, everybody knew that was going to be an absolute banger. But, just to have them together just made that so much more special. So it's almost unfathomable today, 43 years later, Pat, like you said, to have that type of card actually happening. You know what I mean? But back in 1979, boxing was in a different place, and they're able to do something like that.
Yeah, dude, it's I guess working our way toward the main event. We'll start with kind of Hagler and Tuofermo. Why not?
Mm-hmm.
It's Marvelous Marvin. He also recently, unfortunately, passed away. So that's still kind of raw, I think, for a lot of people, especially because of the return to the International Boxing Hall of Fame this past year, and he was a big feature every year at the Hall of Fame. This was kind of the first year without him and without several other fighters who had passed away in the meanwhile too. But I guess it's just important to remember, rewinding a little bit in Marvin Hagler's history and U.S. history too, and I'll try to condense it as much as I can so I don't go off in the weeds too much. But Marvin Hagler, even though he fought out of Massachusetts and was massive around Brockton and whatnot, just like Marciano, came from Newark, New
Yeah.
Jersey, and a fairly important thing to remember, just to kind of explain who Marvin Hagler was, how he thought, why he acted the way he acted, and how paranoid he was, and how pissed off and frustrated he was throughout his boxing career. I mean, I'm not saying that this is the reason for it. I'm saying that if you take this into account, I think, can understand a bit more. Back in Newark in the 1960s, late 1960s, during the civil rights movement, in the summer of 1967, there were riots around the U.S., like all around the U.S. in just about any major city, and especially in the on the West Coast. Philadelphia, Newark, New York had a number of riots, and in Newark, it was like its own thing. It was really bad, really, really bad. Obviously, stemming from a lot of racial and social injustice and inequality, but also a couple of inciting incidents, kind of like the George Floyd protests in 2020.
Hmm.
In any case, how that involves Marvin Hagler was that his family home, he said that his mom hid them, he and his siblings, in their home during the riots for like 3 days. And then their home was eventually destroyed, and or at least damaged really badly. And so they moved from Newark to Massachusetts. And so basically that, I think, was really formative in terms of Marvin Hagler's distrust for a lot of people, especially distrust for, I mean, dude, just fucking putting it plainly, white authority.
Yes, I was about to bring that up. Good point, Pat.
I
And-
mean, just fucking putting it plainly, that's just how I think he felt for a lot of his career. And this Antuofermo fight buildup, the fucking result, everything
Not really gonna help,
just
yeah.
fueled it, just fueled it.
So, like you said, Hagler moves to Brockton, and like going coming from the Newark riots and the things that were all the tumultuous, that was all the tumultuous, things that were going down with the country and with the riots and the tension, everything. It was, America was definitely like in a hot pot at that point, and Hagler being a kid and witnessing all of this stuff as a child and being traumatized by that certainly didn't help him when he moves to Brockton, Massachusetts, which I'm from Massachusetts, all right, so I can even relate to this. It's like a whole different world from Newark. Sure, there's parts out there it's really bad. There's other things like that. You can relate to it in certain ways, but in terms of just, the population and the way things are out there, it's different. And Hagler was in a world, like you said, now he's, instead of where he was in Newark, now he's in Brockton, where certain parts is a lot of Italian Americans, Irish Americans, Portuguese, this and that. No one really like him, and the way he gets in the boxing, more or less, is that at one point, as a teenager, he goes to a party. I think you can help me corroborate this, and gets into an argument with a guy, another guy that ends up becoming a fighter himself, named Darnell Wingfall, who was a bully around the neighborhood and just an overall tough guy. And I think they were arguing over a woman or something for the matter. But Hagler and Wigfall go outside for a fight, and Wigfall beat him up. And everybody witnessed this, everything like that. And Hagler was embarrassed. He was hurt, but he actually, he got beat up, and he said to himself, "I'm never going to let this happen to me again." And he seeked out to go to a gym to go find out, how to fight. So first gym he ends up at is a guy who, if you listen to the show, he's probably most known for working with Peter McNeely, and his name was Vinny Vecchione. Was it Vecchione? Vecchione?
I guess Vecchione, I would
Yeah, yeah,
imagine, but
Vinny
I don't know.
I don't know. But
I'm
that's the
not
first
positive.
gym from from George Kimball's Four Kings book and a couple other Hagler accounts. That's the first gym Hagler ended up at. It wasn't at the Petronelli gym. He wandered into Vinny Vecchione's gym. And like you just alluded to, Pat, Hagler having a distrust now of, white people and authority and stuff like that. He didn't say anything when he went into that gym. He just sat on the bench and just got really quiet and just kind of observed everything. It was kind of, wasn't going to go out of his way to approach anyone. He was going to wait till someone kind of approached him, and then, because it's just doing that. And he said that In 3 days that he sat there, Vecchione, no one even came, no one looked in his direction, no one acknowledged him, no one nothing. So he eventually left there because just nothing, he felt nothing was going to happen. Probably for the best, for the best, because in years later, Vecchione literally was just known for working for Peter McNeely and that stupid farce that he had when the Tyson fight in the Pizza Hut commercial. That was it. There was literally nothing else he ever did worth of note besides just training, local guys in New England. So that was a blessing in disguise for Hagler. Now he ends up at the Petronelli gym, owned by Goody and was his brother Pat, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And over there, Hagler did the same thing. He didn't approach anyone, just kind of sat on the bench, just got really quiet and just, observed. Finally, I think it was Goody approached him after like the second or third day and walked up to him and said, "Son, would you like to learn how to box?" Hagler looked at him and said, "I do. I want to." And he said, "Okay," and the rest is kind of
it's a very passive aggressive way to fucking get a trainer,
Yeah.
just sitting there and like staring motherfuckers down until somebody's
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
"So what are you doing? What are you?"
Because you're like that. I mean, look, man, and coming
But hey, it
from
worked.
gyms like that, there were kids that used to come to the gym too that didn't talk. Like sometimes they would just go with a friend of theirs. I would watch them too as kids. We didn't know who they were
That's
because
true.
they wouldn't know nothing. They would just kind of stand in the corner and observe whether they were
Well,
shot or.
and I mean, not to interject too much, but it takes balls, dude. It takes guts to go into a boxing gym and to start, like, not just go in there and kind of, deep, but to actually train. It takes fucking guts, man.
Because if you walk into a gym, especially when you're younger, you feel like all eyes are on you, and they are to a degree. When you walk in, you're a foreigner and you haven't been in there, and everybody knows each other in that gym, and all of a sudden you see
it's intimidating, donk, 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 donk. There's a bunch of noise and shit. It's crazy.
People are still glancing at you. All of a sudden they're hitting the headband, they're kind of looking at you like, "Oh, who's that?" And then you walk into the trainer and they're like, "Oh, is this gonna be someone trying to join us?" Like, it can be nerve wracking, but Hagler went up there, explained who he was, yada yada yada, and they picked him up, and the rest is history. He became a prodigy right away because he had a work ethic that no one had ever seen before. Early on, he told Petronelli, he was like, "Yeah, I'm going to be champion of the world one day." Petronelli, he was still a kid, so Petronelli just kind of like, he's like an early teenager. Petronelli just kind of joked it off. He was like, "Yeah, that's great, kid." He was like, "When you become champion, I'll be your manager." And you couldn't write it any better than that.
They said that back in the day he used to run, and that when he was running, like way back in the day, he used to mutter to himself like, "I'm gonna kill him. I'm gonna kill them all. Nobody can stop me. Nobody can stop me from killing him." And he'd just sit there muttering to himself, like during his road work, because he had a one-track mind as far as like what he wanted to do, and he was also a highly competent, if not very good amateur too. He wasn't just some guy. I sometimes that kind of seems to be he's a street fighter. It's like, no, dude, he was a fucking boxer. He was very well schooled and he knew what he was doing in there, even if he had a fairly, kind of rough style or an aggressive physical style. But even so, the funny thing is when you like going into this fight and when going into the Antuofermo fight. So, I mean, sorry, I don't want to fast forward too much because it's important. Like what he went through to that point is important because Philadelphia in particular, the middleweight division during that time, it's like the very top it wasn't super top heavy, but on that kind of like A- to like C+ level, bro, super fucking thick, real deep, super fucking deep. And Philadelphia in particular had a number of middleweights that were really, really good. A number of those East Coast cities had middleweights that were really good. And those were the fighters that Marvin Hagler had to go through in order to get that middleweight title shot. And even then, even fucking all the way back then, it was like overdue. People were writing about Marvin Hagler and saying like, what is it going to take? Like, why is this guy not getting his title shot? And so, I mean, it's funny also because the way that he was written about was not like he was a power puncher or anything. That he was more written about like he was a boxer puncher with some emphasis on the boxer for sure. Like he wasn't known as like a destroyer.
Totally. And it should be noted, buddy, it should be noted too that like, so when he turned pro in 1973. And he was just right after he won the national AAU championship. That's a big award, especially back then. That was a big, big tournament. It was right on par with the Golden Gloves and everything else. And that would put you on track to, if you stayed as an amateur and you win more awards, like that would put you on track to eventual, at least um a shot at the Olympics. The thing with Hagler was that he was impatient. The 72 games had just passed. I don't think he was really ready to wait, 3.5, 4 years to for the next shot. And I remember he was quoted as saying too that like, trophies don't buy groceries or something to the effect of that. And so he turns pro, but with no fanfare, even though he wins the AU championship. It's obviously not the Olympic gold medalist. And, the past Olympics with Sugar Ray Seales winning it, everything that just passed. So Hagler's in a transition. He has to come up the hard way, not like guys like Sugar Ray Leonard and Howard Davis who are all, guaranteed contracts with networks already and just going to be featured and making six-figure paydays from their pro debut. Hagler wasn't making shit. He turns pro at Brockton High School. Like he had to, crawl his way to the top even before he went to Philly because there was already a bunch of roadblocks that were already thrown in his way too. You know what I mean? Like he was beating a lot of the guys in the local New England scene, and he finally got a chance to avenge his street beatdown against the notorious Darnell Wingfall. And in a fight in a battle with Unbeatens ended up beating him, and I think he beat him a couple of times. But already, by the time he ends up fighting Sugar Ray Seales in 1974, Hagler is just a guy that's been on the New England scene. Like he's not nationally known. He's undefeated, but people, he's a guy that's just been hardened, like you said, as the dude that's just in his mind, all he wants to do is seek and destroy and try to make it to the top. And he's doing it the hard way. He hasn't been coddled, and he hasn't been fed any cupcakes. And when he fights Seales in a TV studio of all things, I don't think the fight was ever filmed because obviously the film would have been shown by now. But we've seen photos of it, and it looks fascinating, right? It's like literally like a television studio.
Yeah. Like the curtains and all that type of shit. Yeah, it looks fucking funky.
It really does. Like you're about to film like a TV show or something, and then you just see like a small audience around there, and there's Hagler and there's Sugar Ray Seales right there going at it.
And if I'm not mistaken, I believe that is the fight that Ray Seales later on, according to him, said that he was convinced that they were going to do some sort of exhibition,
yes,
or something to that effect, and that it was not going to be like a full on whatever. And that he got there, and that Hagler was like fucking raring to go, and he was like, oh. And I mean, I have no idea. That sounds kind of weird, but whatever. I mean, it's not impossible. But that being
if Sam Silverman, the longtime famous New England promoter, I think he was behind that fight because I think he passed away a couple of years afterwards. If he was behind that, then he probably, I wouldn't put him past him to convince Seales that he was coming in for just the easy coddled, whatever it may be.
Yeah, I don't know, man. I mean, like I said, it's not impossible, but it's kind of a weird story. But even so,
he beat Seales, right?
Who was the 1972 Olympic gold medalist. So it was almost kind of like, yeah, it was like making a point. It was making a big point for him.
And he still couldn't catch a break after that. If anything, that made it even tougher for him because people are now just like, whoa, who the fuck is this? He has no name. He has no money to attach to it. And like, it's just a big risk. And he just whooped up the Olympic gold medalist that people, I don't think Seales had the same clamor that Leonard and everyone else did. But like, he was still a guy that people had a lot of promise in, you know what I mean? And he got cooked in that fight. So It's like,
And he was the next Sugar Ray before Ray Leonard was.
Yes, yeah, Sugar Ray Seales, exactly. So again, man, it took years. It took for a while. The mid-70s, Hagler was still, when Carlos Monzon, people, here's the thing too, Pat, right? People always say, oh, Monzon could have fought Hagler, blah, blah, blah. No, not at all. Hagler was still going through the ranks at this point, fighting. He was fighting often and gaining a lot of experience, but by 1975, 76, he wasn't even considered even close to a title shot. If anything, people were still talking about him in hushed tones and being like, man, should we even risk ourselves against a guy like this?
Yeah, it was tough for him to even break into that Philadelphia scene by then.
Yes.
That scene alone, that scene, not even, never mind the other places that were producing fighters, that scene alone was rough, man. And so even just breaking into that scene was tough, and he did, but he did it with a couple of tough losses that he wound up avenging, fucking, what am I talking about? Avenging, obviously. But that being said, it didn't come without, paying a price, dude. He toiled on this circuit, basically. He was running the gauntlet. That was the fucking gauntlet, was this pack of fucking middleweights here, dude.
And he was forced to go there.
And like you said, so Carlos Monzon retires. And by the time Carlos Monzon retired, it was because he was struggling in his last handful of fights. He was either getting buzzed, rocked, wobbled, or having some sort of difficulty with whoever he was fighting. And they were pretty good fighters too. It's not like he was struggling with scrubs, but I think that he realized that it was time to, and on top of that, coupled with like all of his legal issues and the destructive lifestyle he was leading, I think that he just knew it was time to go. He retires, and I think it was 1972. Rodrigo Valdez. I'm sorry?
You said 72. You meant like 77, I think. Or
I might have. Yes. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Sorry. Or he. Damn. I just had it up and I was looking at it. So apparently I didn't retain it very well. Yeah. Sorry. You're correct. So retired in 77, not 72. And then Rodrigo Valdez wound up winning the middleweight championship after that. Like you mentioned Hugo Coro. And basically that's kind of where Marvin Hagler's path intertwined with Vito Antuofermo, who, also was from the East Coast, was also with an Italian team. It's not to say that like all East Coast Italians knew each other, but the boxing community is small. And so in any case, it was pondered that these two would eventually meet at some point a couple years before this. And then finally, it was of course, I navigated away, but in 1979 in Monaco. So by this time, like I said, Marvin Hagler's already run the gauntlet through the Philadelphia middleweights and gotten his vengeance where he needed it. And people have been calling for a middleweight championship shot for Marvin Hagler for a good year or two by now. And so the middleweight championship kind of getting passed around, or, there's no firm leader.
It was a weird transition after that, after not to cut you off, but like after Monzon retired. It really was, because Monzon was that dominant champion for a long time. Actually, how we're going to relate this to the welterweights in a minute, but like with Jose Annapolis. But like Monzon was the dominant champion for a long time at middleweight from the very beginning after he knocked out Nino Benvenuti. So he retires, and his nemesis for the past couple of years, Rodrigo Valdez, finally takes the throne. As we've talked about in past shows before, Valdez, who looked so formidable against other middleweights before then and against Monzon, running him the gauntlet twice, and Benny Briscoe, yada yada yada. All of a sudden, he starts looking kind of mediocre when he becomes champion. Like, he's made a couple of defenses, but clearly the spark or whatever was pushing him when Monzon was still active is gone now. And when he loses to Hugo Coro, that's when the middleweight division is just kind of like in a flux, where you just kind of what? Because
yeah. He wasn't looking very dominant as a middleweight champion, Valdez, that is. And then when Hugo Coro beats him, I think it was kind of like a moment where people are like, well, where are we going to go from here?
Exactly.
And so, but that also opened the door for Vito Antuofermo, who was ranked, I think, a little bit higher by the WBC than Hagler or something like that. So I don't know if it was a connections thing, probably, because it sounded like Top Rank was promoting Antuofermo at the time and stuff like that. But in any case, Antuofermo gets the shot at Hugo Coro, beats him. And then on top of that, on the undercard, Marvin Hagler is fighting Norberto Cabrera. But the entire time, so during the promotion of this fight, like the idea of fights being taken to Monaco is a somewhat newer thing, or at least they're trying to hype up the pageantry. And we all know how this happens in various locales from the last few years. Macau, they did that shit for Macau for a couple of years. Whoa, this is a brand new thing. We're doing this for years, and nothing ever happened. They've gone back to Monaco in recent years, but it doesn't happen often. Similarly, they're trying to build up the idea of fights happening in Monaco more. And when they were promoting this fight, supposedly the promotions for these fights in Monaco were super stiff. The fighters aren't supposed to talk. They're not promoting themselves. They just go through the motions and have the fights. And it's like this hoity-toity, everybody's having this fucking like $1,000 plate meal type of shit while fighters are fighting type of, bullshit. And they're in tuxedos and whatnot. But during the promotion, Marvin Hagler, who's fighting on the undercard, spoke up and was like, basically, this is some bullshit. Like, I'm the one who's supposed to be getting the middleweight title shot. I don't know what the fuck is going on in the main event, but I'm gonna tell you this: like, whoever is fighting, like, I'm gonna fight him next, and blah blah blah. And I guess that caught everybody off guard because the European folks who were covering this were not expecting it. And so Marvin Hagler making the noise and blah blah blah. He's criticizing the main event where Antuofermo defeats Coro, and so that fight, the spark was lit for these two to finally meet. And on top of that, on top of Marvin Hagler deserving this shot against Antuofermo, he still took the short end of the stick by a lot to get the fight.
Absolutely. It's, Antuofermo was one of those guys. He was from the New York area, really popular. He came up tough himself. He suffered a few losses early in his career, most notably because he had really, really bad scar tissue. Like, the guy, if you breathe on him, it's kind of like Arturo Gatti years later. If if you looked at him, just looking at him, he would start swelling up. And Antuofermo was different, not so much swelling, but he would just bleed. Like, if you breathed on him, he would get a nick on his eye. You know what I mean? And coming up through the scenes, he suffered losses to the likes of like Maurice Hope and I believe Howard Weston Jr. because of eye issues. But he was just a scrappy guy, another really tough dude from the division that had really good names on his ledger as well, like Emil Griffith and a few others, and probably a little bit more popular than Hagler was at that point. Even though Hagler was the guy that like consensus the uncrowned middleweight champion, Antuofermo had a following and was. And in terms of Arum, he probably easier to promote, and so that's why that fight was to be made. With Hagler being known that, hey, you would get the winner of this. So yeah, Hagler's pissed off because he felt like he wanted Coro and he wanted it right then and there. But the stage was set, like you said, for Antuofermo in his first title fight. He had to fight a guy like Hagler, and that made it even bigger because Antuofermo was popular. He had a crowd pleasing style, even though he was a mauler and a brawler. And Hagler was a guy that just fuming, been destroying everything in his path. Righted the wrongs with the two losses that he had already had at this point, and had gone through everyone in the division. We've talked about he had to go through Philly. We even talk about how Don King fucked him around when he tried to join the U.S. title tournament, the U.S. championship tournament, and Goody Petronelli and the rest of them were just like, yo, why can't Hagler join? How are you going to put the guys that Hagler's already knocked out in this tournament and you won't put Hagler in there? And Don King tells Hagler, listen, if you drop the Petronellis and sign with me, you can be in the tournament. Everything will be good. And Hagler, showing his loyalty, said, I'm not doing that, and kind of screwed him in as well. So that was the thing. Hagler being loyal to his cornerman, to his team, and doing everything, even brought more detriment to him trying to ascend to the title, because that's just how boxing works. But at this point now, man,
ultimately that was a good decision to not go into that fucking tournament.
Thank God. Yeah. And just in general with his career, because it just showed that type of loyalty that was very rare in boxing. But Bob Arum took a chance with Hagler. You got to give it to him for that. He got in business with the Petronellis. They didn't try to push him out on that, and figured to himself too, I can make money. And either way, I got Antuofermo, I got Hagler. Some way I'm going to be controlling the middleweight championship. So that's how the stage was set.
Yeah, and it makes sense too that I think that this was probably a bit of a hardcore matchup at the time in terms of interest, because neither of them were super popular, but it was two guys who were just going to throw down. It was two fighters who were coming to fight no matter what. You knew how Vito Antuofermo was going to fight. He was going to bore in. He wound up getting that scar tissue. Also, he was on The Sopranos too. I forgot about that shit until I was watching that shit the other night, and I was like, isn't that it is Vito Antuofermo?
He was. That wasn't it.
Yeah, dude. I totally forgot he was on that show. I was watching the other night. But in any case, yeah, dude, he'd bore in with his head. He had real bad scar tissue because he was always getting cut, like in his eyebrows and stuff like that. And he was going to throw. He wasn't a big puncher, but he was going to throw for sure. And so Hagler being Hagler, also being the kind of guy who was not usually big on taking a backward step, but could. He could definitely, but usually wanted to push the fight. I think a lot of people knew that this was bound to be a good action fight. And so, I mean, yeah, I think that it was. And I think that it wound up being a pretty good fight from an entertainment standpoint, especially in the later rounds as Hagler started to kind of slow down. But
Yes.
yeah, I mean, like this, well, I mean, I don't want to like, try to like hold out like there's some sort of fucking suspense. Like a lot of people know that this fight ended in a draw, and it was a fairly unceremonious draw. A lot of people thought that it was fairly controversial at the time, and it was written about controversially. Dude, I mean, I'm assuming you thought Hagler won pretty firmly as well.
Yeah, like I've watched it a few times, and I'm not gonna like. It's actually a little bit close. I thought it was a little bit closer than like it wasn't out and out like Hagler won fucking 12
It
out of the.
wasn't like the worst robbery I've ever seen
No,
or
no, no,
anything
no, no,
like
no,
that.
no. But Hagler, I thought definitely won the fight and won it by a couple of points to spare. Absolutely. Like he was out. But the thing is, what happened was that Hagler didn't go toe to toe with Antuofermo because his corner even told him not to do that. Not that so much because they were worried Antuofermo would overpower him, but because, like you said, Pat, like he
Yeah,
used
why do it?
why do that? It was just not that was his fight. You were gonna suffer some kind of injury. It was gonna be grueling from doing that. And if you can outbox him easily by doing that, why not just do that? And that's what Hagler was doing. And he cut Antuofermo to ribbons early on. You know, like Antuofermo had Nick over here, yeah, Nick over here, this, there, that. His cornerman, his cutman, was the legendary Freddie Brown, a guy whose career went back decades upon decades upon decades. Most notably, as you know, more modern fans most will probably remember him with his association with Ray Arcel and Roberto Duran. But Freddie Brown had been around forever. And at one point during the fight, Freddie Brown apparently, as he was trying to work on Antuofermo's cuts, he called on his assistant and said, "Help!" And I don't think you could do that today, right? That you could have two separate cut men working on cuts at the same time in a fight.
I, I mean,
I haven't
I
seen.
I don't know. I've never seen that personally. I think you probably could. Like if you had like a trainer and somebody who's supposed to be there, yeah, probably. But if just like calling somebody over, no,
Like
I
that
don't think
was
so.
no, that was a guy in the corner, but they said help, and they both were working on them.
Yeah, I don't
And
think I've ever seen that. I mean,
Freddie Brown said
the fight
afterwards,
would be stopped by then now.
totally.
Like
And Freddie Brown said afterwards, he was quoted, you said, "Man, I'm getting old." He was like, "In my prime, I could stop 6 cuts in under a minute and still have some time left over."
which
um,
is nuts. I mean, and dude, we could do an entire podcast about like the art behind the cut man and shit like that. Fools were, I think it to some degree they're allowed to make some shit now, but like I don't even know if they're allowed to. But back up into the fucking 70s and 80s, motherfuckers would literally have one of those little like doctor bags, one of the ones that
yes,
like like opens up, and it'd be like full of little fucking bottles, like blue.
all of their own concoctions that they made up on their own
Yeah.
that they developed.
You'd pull out some shit. It's got like a fucking skull and crossbones on
And they
it.
were
And like,
all trading them with each other too.
you'd
Like they
fucking
would
like
all go
pull
on
out a
and talk
cork
about
and
it.
they're like,
Yeah.
ugh.
I forgot which cup man I was reading
Fucking
about.
wild.
They were saying that the cup man was saying I had, you know, I had this and I had like all the normal stuff that you would have in a corner, plus some illegal stuff that's definitely not allowed anymore. And then the guy said I also had a couple of bottles of some special shit that I mixed up on my own of various things.
Dude, yeah, like I've seen some like yeah, a couple of interviews where fools are talking about like I got this powder, or I got this, and
Yeah, yeah,
this,
yeah.
and then I got like special liniments. I'm like, what the fuck are special liniments, bro? Anyway, but yeah, so
So
uh
they're like Freddie Brown, because as a lot of old school trainers, I'd love to know how they would hold up today in the rules today. But back then, they were able to do their tricks, and to his credit, he was able to hold Enterfermo's face up because of it. And it was a grueling fight. Hagler was outboxing him, but also too like you know Enterfermo was still coming, coming, coming. Eventually, he has to stop and trade with him too, which he did and willingly did. But you know Enterfermo was able to shade some of the later rounds because of that, because Hagler did slow down. This was his first title fight, and I think people even said that you could see that there was a little bit of nerves with Hagler there too, with just he was on the big stage for the first time like this and just everything. And as Enterfermo came on strong in the later rounds, I guess you know it pushed the fight slightly closer. But again, it's still kind of like indefensible that he won that fight. And if you watch it too afterwards, when they announce it, they're like Enterfermo, you know, it's a draw. The Enterfermo's corner picks him up like he just won the world championship again, right? He's celebrating, he's raising his hands and all that. Hagler is dejected as shit, and you hear Cosell in the background. It's a draw. Antuofermo retains. Like he's almost saying it incredulously. Like he's still kind of keeping the straight path, but you can see it, you can hear it in his voice where he's kind of surprised, like, holy shit. And the most glaring part of it, and I don't know if this was actually true or not, but it's been written about and it's been written about in various articles. Mills Lane, who was the referee, allegedly went up to Hagler after the fight and told him, "Hey, turn this way. Congratulations. Turn this way for the camera. So when I raise your hand, we can pose for this and stuff like that."
Yeah, I was reading that too. There's a really good Sports Illustrated article by Pat Putnam
Yes.
about the fight. I mean, yeah, dude, it really should have gone Hagler's way. It was close, but I think that I would probably agree. He probably fought a little bit harder than he should early on, and then maybe didn't have enough gas for later or something. Even so, I thought that he won. It should have been his fight by like a couple of points, but it was one of those fights where it seemed like close but clear. Like
Yes.
there didn't seem like yeah. There were some rounds where Antuofermo won for sure, but most of them were rounds where like Hagler was slowing down. When he was keeping pace, he was consistently landing harder, consistently landing cleaner. And on top of that, like he even though he was mostly staying away from Antuofermo when he could, he still wound up cut like around his right eye and was bleeding pretty good for the last like third of the fight. And so, I mean, it was still a pretty rough and tumble fight. And like I said, it was a good fight. In the last maybe 5-6 rounds of the fight, dude, it was entertaining. It was
Sure.
actually a pretty good slugfest at a couple points, but it was just that when Antuofermo gets hit too, because of the way that he's leaning in, there were times where he was like, like just
Yeah.
totally like whipping around and shit like that. And because he's so off balance and he's like leaping in and whatnot, almost looking like Nassim Hamed when he gets hit, just so exaggerated. So
Yeah.
that probably didn't help either. But also you have to wonder, like the judges are right there and they're seeing that shit. It just seemed to me like if you're gonna edge it either way, it would be to Hagler, but apparently not.
I think is the most damning thing is that after the fight, Bob Arum and others were like saying we need to have an immediate rematch. This was bullshit, yada yada yada. And Jose Suleiman, just on brand for him in the WBC.
Total
We're
clown,
not gonna
dude.
be. He said we're not gonna be intimidated and pushed around by any promoters. We're gonna review the fight and then figure it out. But first, Alan Minter
Who are
deserves.
you to tell us to do the right thing?
Yeah, right. Yeah. And so
Total
Hagler had to
clown.
wait almost like over a year, almost a year for another title fight because Alan Minter at that point was the mandatory challenger for the winner of that. And even though it was a draw, and by most accounts, like you would think there should have been an immediate rematch right after that between Hagler and Antuofermo, and Minter should have just waited and get the winner of that again. No, Minter got the title fight. Minter beats Antuofermo in a controversial fight, just about as controversial, and maybe not even as bad as Hagler, as the first Hagler fight. But Minter Antuofermo was controversial enough to warrant an immediate rematch. Interesting enough, right?
Well, and it went to show how the politics could work
Yes.
for somebody and against somebody else in seemingly totally equal situations where
Exactly.
you had the head of the WBA at the time, or the guy who was basically the behind the scenes uh action guy at the WBA, Elias Cordoba, basically according to reports and according to like the Pat Putnam article, what happened was that Jose Suleiman said, no, we're not going to be issuing no immediate rematch. I don't know what you're talking about. Uh, Alan Minter's been waiting in the wings and he's our number one challenger. So, they got to wait for Minter and Antuofermo to figure this shit out now. But then Elias Cordova said, yeah, that sounds about right. We'll go with that. But then, according to Pat Putnam, he had a meeting with Bob Arum, and then after the meeting said, "Nah, we changed our mind. Actually, we think we should order an immediate rematch." And
Yeah.
so it placed Antuofermo in a position where, regardless of who he fought, they were threatening some sort of action against him. And on top of that, we've talked about this before. A couple years before this, so was around 1975, 76, 77, was that prolonged splitting of the WBA and WBC, where feuding and shit like that and refusing to recognize each other and whatnot. And so on top of that, here's another situation where they're at odds and placing the fighters in a shitty situation. And Marvin Hagler, regardless, has just having to fucking sit.
And it's ridiculous because, like you said, it was the same circumstance, basically. Hagler had a controversial fight with Antuofermo. Antuofermo has a controversial fight with Minter. I think the main gripe with that one was that there was a judge from the UK that basically scored almost every round for Minter when it clearly shouldn't have been that way. And it made it look like there was a weird bias, and so they ordered an immediate rematch. They have a rematch. Minter chops him up and stops, Antuofermo confirming everything. But yeah, it's funky that Hagler couldn't get an immediate rematch, but Antuofermo was able to get one with Minter. Regardless,
Was
Hagler.
that UK judge? Was that UK judge Adelaide Bird?
Yeah, yeah. Can neither confirm nor deny. um, but it's just kind of sad that it took Hagler another year before he was finally able to get that championship. And then on brand for Hagler, and the whole time he struggled his entire career trying to get to that point. He couldn't even celebrate that win because of the racist assholes in the arena that day throwing beer cans at him and his entourage. So
yeah, dude, so fucked up. Fucking Minter said something to the effect of would never let a black man take the title or hold the title or something like that. And I mean, it just wound up being somewhat, well, bandwagon, racist fucking bandwagon after he cuts Minter up and beats the crap out of him for whatever it was, 2 rounds. They pelt him with fucking beer bottles and beer
he goes
cans.
on his knees, he's celebrating, he's finally going to become champion. He couldn't even get the belt put around him, anything like that.
Yeah, they
Because
got to whisk him away undercover.
And someone said too, I think it was in the book. It was in the book that that Kimball wrote, The Four Kings.
Four Kings.
That he said that it was either he witnessed this or someone else did, that they knew there was going to be trouble, that they were selling beer by the case that night, like over there, and they said they were watching like skinheads walking up the rafters with like holding double cases of beer walking up there. And they were just like, and the guy was looking, they're just like, oh, well, that doesn't look good.
It's like having free bat night at Dodger Stadium along with quarter beer night or something. You know what I mean? It's like, what the fuck are you doing, bro? But I mean, regardless, that doesn't excuse anything. It was fucking awful and it was stupid what they did, and it fucked and it just I think, going back to how we started, it probably further fueled this distrust and hatred and frustration from Hagler. Dude, he lost his first fucking middleweight title challenge unjust, well, didn't lose it, but didn't get the title. I mean, to him it might as well have been a loss. I think draw, who gives a fuck? You know what I mean? I would have been pissed too. And so that, I think, just further placed him in a position where he was like, what the fuck am I trusting anybody for? The Petronellis are who got me to this point and who got me to the title eventually. Who the fuck am I putting my faith in?
Yeah.
So I think you have to kind of understand in that context when we go back and start talking about Leonard and Benítez, because obviously Hagler and Leonard eventually meet.
Absolutely. And so that's what builds to this main event now, is that like it's the polar opposite of what we're just coming to. Hagler and Antuofermo are two guys, hard scrappers that had
sorry to interrupt you too. But on one of the broadcasts, you could see Ray Leonard. He's not even fucking suited up, nothing, just sitting ringside watching Hagler.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I wonder too, I don't think he was thinking at that point too that eventually those two were going to fight. He was just watching it as an observer.
It's just fucking wild.
He was like a Hagler fan. He was happy to, kind of thought that Hagler was job too. It's crazy.
Just wild.
It really is, considering that, what was it, 8 years later, they finally get it on. But, yeah, the main event, man, it's polar opposites of the two guys that we were just talking about. You got Sugar Ray Leonard, the darling of the 1976 Olympic team, against Wilfred Benítez, the genius, the boy prodigy. So many different words you can use for Benítez and his skill level, that at that point, no one had ever seen someone that young do the things that he was able to do. He was a fucking wizard in the ring, bro, like an absolute wizard. And you were going to put those two together to, for the welterweight championship. You couldn't get any better than that. So again, you got to go back to the beginning of the 70s really quick. Who was the dominant champion of that decade? Jose Napoles. You know what I mean? After he knocked off Curtis Cokes, He was the resident champion and a great champion at that. One of the greatest welterweights who ever lived, man. His blend of speed and skill, everything there was, unparalleled. By the time he loses the championship, though, in 1975 to a very very good fighter by the name of John Stracey from England, the welterweight division's kind of, in a turnstile again, because like Munzon, you had a guy that was the dominant champion for so long, and all of a sudden, when he either retires or loses, it puts the division in a tailspin momentarily until you get a guy who's going to be like, hold the momentum again. So Stracey was a good fighter and a good champion, but clearly he didn't have the stuff to be a long reigning champion, because after he made a couple of defenses, including one against Hedgeman Lewis, he ends up losing to the very popular and a good fighter in himself, Carlos Palomino. Over at the on the WBA side, that title's being switched around like hot potatoes until a guy by the name of Angel Espada becomes champion. And pretty soon, before he knows it, he runs into a precocious teenager himself by the name of Pipino Cuevas. And Cuevas, shockingly, who had a mediocre record himself and wasn't really looked upon as anything special, knocks the shit out of Espada and becomes champion. So now you got you got Pipino Cuevas as champion, you got Carlos Palomino as champion. Both of those guys are very, very good fighters, and they're looked upon maybe as eventually moving on themselves as like a potential super fight. Benitez at this point is down at junior welterweight. He had just beaten the legendary Antonio Cervantes for the championship, but there was already kind of questions arising about his dedication and the things going on with him and yada yada yada. You know what I mean? Sugar Ray Leonard was already building himself at this point too. He had at the '76 Olympics, he had just turned pro and he was still building himself up, so he wasn't quite at that point. Everything was still coming to a head. Benitez eventually moves up, fights Palomino. What was it, in 1979, I think it was, and scores a razor thin decision over him, becomes champion, right? Over on the welterweight side, Pipino Cuevas is still champion, and he's still dominating everything like that. But like Leonard, there's like, as Leonard is about to become, as building up to become number one, there's the question now: is he going to fight Pipino Cuevas, which would look like it might be happening, or is he going to fight Wilfred Benítez? Now it's going to end up happening. He's going to fight Benitez. Or obviously, that's like the more, I would say, the fight for the fans. That would be the fight that everyone might be more clamoring for, because the contrast of styles, the everything like that. You can't get any bigger than that. If you put this in 2022 today, dude, that's like as big as it gets. Like these dudes,
yeah,
you can't beat that.
Benitez is 21 and also undefeated.
Yeah,
he's had a draw, but he's undefeated. And I think the draw, I want to say, was against Weston in a pretty good fight.
Or it was Weston or Bruce Curry. No, I think it was Weston, because he beat Bruce Curry by like bullshit decision. That's right.
And so he's undefeated, and he's only 21 years old. He almost has 40 fights under his belt at 21 years old. Now, I mean, that's kind of its own issue, though. That's its own story, because Wilfred Benítez, who's actually born in New York, believe it or not. He grew up for a little bit in, I want to say, South Bronx.
Okay.
But then he and his brothers, when they were little, started getting into trouble on the streets. And his father, Gregorio, he was the youngest of four brothers. Gregorio, their dad, moves them to Puerto Rico, kind of the outskirts of San Juan, and starts training them all. And Wilfred basically showed, I guess, the most talent, but all of the brothers were fighters. And so starting from a really young age, he turned pro actually at, I think, 15 years old, because Gregorio had falsified records to get him to turn pro.
You don't say.
What's that?
You don't say.
Yeah, dude. I mean, and that's its own. Whew, yeah, bro. The daddy issues there run deep, real deep. But it's 16 years old. Wilfred Benítez is headlining at the Felt Forum, which was like kind of like the old school Madison Square Garden Theater, and it's 16 years old. So already he was on the way to kind of stardom and becomes the youngest world champion ever at 17 years old. And so already you're kind of seeing, the groundwork being laid for a pretty big issue as soon as he wins the championship. And like you said, there's already been a lot of talk about him just not liking to train, not wanting to train, fucking around, getting into trouble. And his dad writes an article, pens an article for The Ring that says essentially the reasons why my son will lose the championship or something like that, you know, and it's like, holy fuck, dude. Imagine like, you know, you have some massive accomplishment and one of your parents goes on to social media and is like, this is why this accomplishment means nothing. Like you'd feel like shit, you know, absolute shit. And so in any case,
It's
this one,
crazy to think, man, because Benitez was so gifted. You watch his fights back then, and he was one of those guys. Like he never held his hands like right up there. Like he always kind of held them like over here, and he just had these instincts, bro. Like just the way he boop 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 boop, you couldn't catch him. And if
he
you like,
he lost some of his biggest fights, and then also on top of that, with all due respect to him, the way that he wound up, it's almost like he still doesn't get, like, you know, people talk about Nicolino Lachey, understandably. They talk about Willie Pep, understandably. Purnell, understandably. All these great defensive masters, dude. I'm just saying, don't sleep on Wilfred Benitez.
you can't. Benitez was an absolute genius, just a genius, man. And I mean, no one look. There's nobody that will ever in this in history. I don't think that will ever able to replicate a 17-year-old beating Antonio Cervantes for the world championship. That is insane.
Yeah,
Like
he
Cervantes was
wasn't
not a
just some
cupcake.
scrub.
No, you know, there was almost like a joke. It wasn't really a joke as much as it was like a thing that people became that they had. If you said Antonio Cervantes' name, you had to put the legendary behind ahead of it. Like he wasn't a bum. Cervantes was the man of the junior welterweight division. After he beat Loche, you know, from the early 70s, when from his loss to Benitez up until he finally lost to Aaron Pryor in 1980, Cervantes was the man of that division. No one was touching that dude. All right. He was a beast and legitimately still one of the top 5 greatest junior welterweights that ever lived. All right. Benitez beat him at 17. That doesn't, you know, like I'm talking Michael Jordan who plays basketball, Tony Williams who plays drums. Certain people are just born to do certain things. Benitez was born to box. Like that's a level of IQ that most people will never able to, like, you know, ever achieve something like that.
Yeah, dude, it's something that's, it's one of those kinds of records that will just be so incredibly difficult to beat. And it's like
Well,
also on
you
some
can't even
level,
too because at 17 you can't be like I don't even think you're allowed to fight for a world title
well,
at
that's
17.
and that's what I'm saying is that like on some level, like, do you want that record be like, I don't put any fucking 16-year-olds in there. What are you talking about? Remember who was it the other day? That little kid the other day that
That
was
Gray
fucking
posted up, yeah, that got beat up in Mexico. That poor kid.
God damn it, dude. Yeah, we don't want this to happen. But I mean, but that's what I'm talking about though. Is so going into this Ray Leonard fight, dude, uh, you know, Wilfred Benitez was a seasoned veteran at 21 years old. He knew what the fuck he was doing. And you know, on the flip side, Ray Leonard, I mean, it's not like he was without experience. No, he wasn't inexperienced, but just there was a pretty big gap in professional experience there.
It's true. You know, Leonard was him. He came up great early on. I'm not even gonna try to lie about that. Like his career, if you want to, when he turned pro from the '76 Olympics, there was a thing in Ring Magazine years ago where they compared him and Ali's opponents early on, and Leonard's clearly trumped Ali's. You know what I mean?
Yeah, because Ali fought some dirtbags fucking early on,
He
bro.
absolutely did. But like by the time 1978, you know, Leonard was already fighting guys like, you know, if you look at 77, 27-3, 21-11. By the
Yeah,
time
like ranked dudes.
absolutely by 1978, when he fights Al Heyman's brother, Bobby Heyman, for instance, who people will be like, oh, Al Heyman had a brother who boxed. Yes, he did. And, you know, Bobby Heyman wasn't a contender or anything like that, but he was a guy that was around the block for a long time. That's when he started fighting dudes left and right. Like he moves on. He fought Mickey Ward's half brother, Dick Eklund. He fights Floyd Mayweather Sr. He fights the very, very tough Randy Shields, who was a pain in the ass for everybody in the welterweight division from the 70s up until the early 80s, and doesn't get talked about enough. Very good contender. Armando Munez, longtime contender who, from losing to Emil Griffith early on in his career to giving Carlos Palomino absolute hell in their welterweight title fight, to giving Jose Napoles. Like, that's how far he went back. He even went back to fight in Napoles. Like, Armando Muniz was just one of those longtime contenders that fought a who's who of everybody in the 70s. And by the time he fought Leonard, would have given Leonard, a hell of a fight, but Leonard was able to blast him out too. Like, this was this competition as Leonard was coming up with. A lot of these dudes today, when they're built up, they fight guys with inflated records. They fight journeymen. They fight guys way past their best. They're not actually being matchmaked to like really like gain experience to that degree. There's some people out there like Top Rank. We like to give them shit sometimes for some of their antics, but they have great Hall of Fame matchmakers that know how to build their prospects. Other people like Golden Boy, to a degree, same as well. And Leonard was built up well. You can't say that, even though he had it looked like he might have an inflated record. Look at the guys he's fighting. You know what I mean? Like, you go from Armando Muniz to Johnny Gant, who was a longtime fringe contender, fought a who's who. Fernand Marcat, another guy from Canada, who had a long-time career from the 60s up until then, fought a who's who, and a really rugged individual who didn't get knocked out by many people, and Leonard blasted him. So, and Adolfo Viruet as well.
Edwin Viruet's brother.
Yes, bro.
Both very good fighters.
Bad motherfuckers, man. Marcos Geraldo was the one that actually like got people concerned about Leonard, because Geraldo was a rugged, big, tough, rugged individual who fought everybody back in the day. Mexican middleweight, which is kind of an anomaly in itself. But he went the distance with Hagler. He gave shit to Leonard, where Leonard had a damaged eye and everything like that. And Mike Trainer, Leonard's manager, and always protective over Leonard, and a genius in itself too, because he was the guy that made sure Leonard never actually like hooked up with a promoter, anyone who bidded on the most money. Like, he was a great manager. But if you read Leonard's book, if you read other accounts, he got freaked out after this fight because Leonard took a lot of punishment in that fight. Geraldo was a bad motherfucker, and he was bigger than Leonard, and he gave Leonard the business that fight. And Leonard was puffed up, and his eyes were a little damaged and all that. And Mike Trainer almost wanted Leonard to retire. He was like scared. He was like, I don't want you taking this type of punishment. And anyways, that was the type of guy Geraldo was. Didn't have a great record, but he was just a rugged, bad motherfucker. Pete Ranzani. And so by the time he's about to fight Wilfred Benítez, his last fight before that was against Andy Price. Andy Price at that point,
poor Andy Price.
Poor Andy Price, right? Andy the Hawk
Seemed
Price.
Like such a nice guy.
Seriously. A rugged contender, had been around the block for a long time, deserved the title shot probably, and he at that point was the only person who had beat both Carlos Palomino and Pepino Cuevas. And so a lot of people were calling him at that point the uncrowned champion before Benitez beat Palomino and before Leonard ascended. And they were saying he deserves the title shot, yada, yada, yada. He's also managed by Marvin Gaye. Keep that in mind really quick. So, Andy Price is the NABF champion. I know he felt a little like overconfident. He thought Leonard was a pretty boy and thought he could with his experience, he could beat him. And Marvin Gaye, before the fight, I believe he bet all of his money on Andy Price on a win. I'm talking not just money like that he had on him. I'm talking like his whole fortune on an Andy Price win. And what happened, Pat?
Andy Price got absolutely slaughtered, dude. Like, it was like, and he just like, it was like, remember that video from a couple years ago where Fool was just playing the motherfucking like drums on dude's head in the subway? Like, yes. He was like, like 50 times in like 3 seconds. Okay, it wasn't that quite that many with Andy Price, but yeah, he just got blasted real bad. And I think that this was kind of one of those instances, or at least one of the earlier instances, where it didn't always happen, but it happened frequently, where if you fucked around and pissed Ray Leonard off, yes, like it brought out a real mean side of him, because like he was a cruel fighter. Like, he was not a fighter that was like going to let you slide, and especially if you were talking shit. And yeah, dude, he was pretty, except for that gap in his teeth, which he got fixed later because fools were probably fucking with him about it. And so, but he was the type of dude that was like, he didn't take that shit lightly. He took it to heart, and then he was gonna whoop your ass for it. And usually that's what happened. Usually he did. And so, he knew Price was talking shit, calling him a pretty boy. He thought that he was going to be able to whoop his ass. He had a lot more experience too. Andy Price was really experienced. He got fucking blasted. And like I said, poor Andy Price, because it's almost like sad. Like, the dude just gets totally overwhelmed. He didn't have a chance.
No, and you watch the fight, and like at first Leonard's probing, he's probing, but you see the intensity in his eyes. And Price landed a counter or two, but he's like, they're just kind of like they're probing each other, they're still feeling each other out. But like you said, man, that might have been the first time people really saw the true like eye of the tiger with Leonard, because once Price got on the ropes,
yeah, he backs to the ropes and Ray's just like, mine.
yeah, Ray, like Price starts freezing up a little bit, and Ray just jabbing, and then at one point he lands that right hand. Price freezes up a little bit, and then Ray just unloads. He lands a body shot, and then just go crazy. Oh. And the way like Price's head, you see Price's head like going in various directions, and then finally as he goes down in an absolute heap. And he looks like a fucking deer that was just born and doesn't know how to use their legs yet, Yeah,
it was bad, dude. And so you could see it I think probably brought some belief back or some spark back, into the idea that, okay, all right, I think we're all right. I think we're okay with this Leonard kid. I think he'll be all right. And
so that was like catapulted them to the Benítez fight.
Well, and those were back in the days too, where that Andy Price fight was 2 months before the Benítez fight. And now, if that happened now, people be like, "Oh my god, he fought 2 months ago! Oh my god!" Now you couldn't even that shit wouldn't happen. But it I think led a lot of people to, well, look, looking right there on the record, dude. He gets Marcos Geraldo, and then 3 months later he's in with Ranzani, and then like a little over a month later it's Andy Price. So obviously
he's 9 fights in 1979. 9 fights in 1979.
Well, and his pace obviously slowed a lot after that. But even so, that's a lot of experience jam packed into a pretty short period of time, and probably contributed to his eye issues too. But even so, and I mean, dude, by this time, I think he'd already like threatened retirement once or twice too already. So, I mean,
he wasn't even supposed to turn pro.
That's true. Yeah, he threatened to retire from boxing entirely after he won the gold.
Word.
So
I wasn't even going to turn pro. So I mean, like, when you
thankfully that wasn't the case, because he turned out to be obviously a really, really, really good fighter. But he packed a lot of experience into this short period of time, and especially in those couple of fights leading up to the Benítez fight. So I mean, it makes sense, knowing that you have this contrast of styles. Okay, we have this newly awakened Ray Leonard that's blasting motherfuckers, and then we have Wilfred Benítez, who is a defensive master. Let's pit these two against each other, dude.
And bro, it was a beautiful fight. Like,
and the stare down.
That's the first thing that has to be mentioned for that. So Benítez is, as we found out, was like notorious for that, because he did it with Hearns a few years later. But that stare down is the stuff of legends. I still say today that's the greatest stare down in boxing history. And I mean, as
wake
weird
you
as
up out of a fucking dead sleep, dude.
Yeah, it makes you seem like a weird hardcore fan that you can like judge stare downs, but nothing will ever compare to that, because the minute both of those dudes got in the ring, Benítez, who was a little bit shorter, just gets right up in Leonard's chest and starts. And Sugar Ray's staring right back down at him too. And this was before even before the referee was giving them instructions. Like, they just straight up, both of them had huge egos, huge, and both of them undefeated. Benítez feeling as the champion, Leonard's beneath him. Leonard feeling this is gonna be a chance in the coronation. I ain't gonna let this guy intimidate me. And they're right here, like you see, like literally nose to nose. They could kiss each other if they wanted to, and they're just staring, and neither one of them will budge. Incredible,
dude. It's easily one of the best, and the Hearns stare down is real good too. Don't get me wrong, but yeah, just the intensity, and it goes on for like uncomfortably long, like where you're sitting there like, are they going to break the stare? No, okay.
Well, they did it. No, their cornermen were the ones who had to break it apart.
Yeah. They peel Ray Leonard away, and Benítez is still trying to, like, he's like, nope, not moving. And they're like, come on, dude, come on. And finally he goes around. But it wound up being such a closely matched fight for so much of it that like not until basically the final moments does one really gain a foothold, because it was so, I mean, it's almost, I think to a lot of people it would be not enjoyable to watch. It's fought on a high enough level that it's not awful or anything like that, but it's, if you don't like that kind of stylistic matchup, Leonard did not come aggressively at him like, like the prize fight or something. He totally respected the fact that Wilfred Benitez is who he is, and I think that he tried to, like, he tried to get shit going in a number of rounds, but it was like he would try and then Benitez would be like whoop 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 whoop, and Leonard would be like, all right, let's calm down, because it was like you can't get him like that.
Dude, even if Benitez was hurt, you showed it in the Hearns fight. If Benitez just had that type of like wired and system inside of him that even if he was hurt and he was a little vulnerable, he was still going to make you miss with multiple punches because that was just how he was wired. And if you threw like a 10 punch flurry at him, chances are you'd miss about 7 of them. That's just the way he was.
Yeah, if not more. Yeah.
So Leonard had to take his time with that. You couldn't go in there and get wild with him because all you're going to do is waste your energy. And eventually Benitez will start picking you apart from there because, you're just getting wild. And he was a natural counterpuncher. That's what he did. But Leonard had such a great boxing brain himself. He knew how to work with it. And like you said, it wasn't the most exciting fight, but it was brilliant and very just intense in the way you're watching each guy. It's like playing chess, and that's the way boxing's supposed to be too, man. It's not just too like as much as I can enjoy Gotti or Ward or Bobby Chacon,
Yeah, of course.
Luca Lemon for beating the shit out of each other. Like I'd love to watch two guys as long as they're throwing punches. Trying to outfeint each other, trying to outcounter each other. You clearly see they're playing chess and trying to work, and that's what Leonard and Benitez was doing. Benitez is a natural thinker. The guy's Bobby Fischer in the ring. He doesn't have to think that much because a guy like Benitez, everything came so naturally to him that he didn't even have to use his mind. That he just knew what he was doing, and that made it on his opponent, even a person as brilliant as Leonard, to make them think even more because they knew they were dealing with a person of equal brilliance, if not even more so than them. Because that was just what they naturally did. So you have to calm down. You can't just go in there and wade in. You have to pick your spots. It might not be the most exciting thing, but fuck it. You got to make sure you're going to win this fight because you're dealing with a guy with the equal brilliance of you. That's what makes this fight so fucking perfect is because you had guys with their boxing brains, of that acumen, of that level, trying to outthink each other, trying to outfeint each other, trying to fight each other. It's brilliant stuff, man. And if Leonard wasn't at his peak, Benitez, apparently, according to him and his dad, he only trained for 2 weeks for that fight. Probably would have won still.
Yeah, dude. And I mean, I guess it's tough to know what Benitez true potential could have been, because throughout his career, they said that even since he was a fairly, young teenager, like 16 or so, that his dad was well aware that he was fucking around too much. And it makes sense, dude. His dad literally used to, Gregorio Benitez used to charge people a quarter at the playground to watch his children fight.
I didn't even know that. Interesting.
So by the time you get to your 16 years old, you're probably sick of that shit, dude. And so clearly Wilfred Benitez had started fucking around already by that point. I'm not trying to make excuses for the guy.
Probably that
just
too.
is what it is.
Piece of shit too, wasn't he?
What's that?
Gregorio was a piece of shit too himself. I know.
Well, let's put it this way, dude. I mean, and we know what boxing is at this point. So I guess at some point we have to kind of examine ourselves. But at the same time, Gregorio had 4 sons, and to my knowledge, at least 3 of the 4, if not all 4, because 3 of the 4 turned pro, and all 3 of them, I think it was the oldest who did not, and all 3 of them wound up with pugilistic dementia. Wilfred, the most severe, and like I said, I believe it was the oldest one. He didn't turn pro or only fought a couple times and had to retire or something like that. And the reason why was Gregorio had given some funky excuse about something, but a lot of people suspected the real reason why was that he also had pugilistic dementia at a really young age. So in any case, 3 out of 4 minimum sons that he totally ruined, by the time they were fairly young and they were shot. And
Mm.
so, yeah, I would say that qualifies as kind of a piece of shit. And on top of that, like I said, the Ring magazine article, he was constantly talking shit on his
And he
son.
was a gambler too. Like he would take the purse,
Yes.
and would spend them on
Also,
the horse.
yes,
Yeah,
he was a horse. He bet on horses. I think it was.
with horses. Yes,
Yeah,
totally.
yeah, not cool, not fucking cool. So yeah, but I mean, this could have been potentially Wilfred Benítez a big triumph for him, defeating Ray Leonard, an undefeated Ray Leonard. I mean, yeah, obviously it could have been written off. Ray Leonard was young; he was fairly young in his career, and if you suffered a loss, so fucking what? It's not the end of the world. But the training for sure. Excuses, nah, man. It just is what it was. He was fucking around from a pretty young age, and had he reached, a higher potential, who knows, man? Who knows?
So let me ask you this, Pat. Do you consider him the fifth king, even though he didn't fight Hagler?
I mean, yeah, dude. I think that's kind of a technicality. I think Hagler would have defeated him. I don't think
Totally.
there's any question
But I
about
mean,
that.
you think though he's not the fifth king because he didn't get a chance to fight Hagler?
No, I think it's fair to call him the fifth king, dude. I mean, as much as he accomplished, like it's almost kind of like unfair to
Because
it.
and not only that too, he fought Hearns, he fought
Yeah,
Leonard, and
and
he fought
fought them
he fought
almost
Durant.
on like basically on even terms too. It
And
wasn't
like
like
I would almost consider him like you know how with the Champions Forever video, you have
yeah, like Norton. We talked
Frazier,
about that before.
you have Norton and Holmes, all right? And so you have Norton, Holmes, Ali, and Frazier. Who did Holmes fought Norton, he fought Ali, he didn't fight Frazier, he didn't fight Foreman. Like Benitez,
Yeah,
if him in that group, he fought Leonard, he fought Hearns, he fought Durant. He didn't end up fighting Hagler. You should put him, if they had the same thing, you probably should have put him there too.
I think it's fair too.
If
Yeah.
he had beat Mustafa Hamsho, and wasn't upset by him, he would have got that title shot against Hagler. So
Yeah, and I mean he fought nearly even up, at least in the fights that he took nearer to his prime. He fought nearly even up with Hearns and Leonard. I
he did.
mean,
He clearly lost to both of them, but I mean he gave them both fits and he whipped Duran in a beautiful one of my favorite performances.
so I mean it's yeah, I don't think that it's unfair at all, dude. Clearly a super great fighter, one of the best Puerto Rican fighters ever, without question. And I mean, yeah, dude, to kind of ignore his accomplishments, especially among the guys who are, yeah, dude, it sucks. And
Yeah,
especially and it's compounded by the fact that he's in such dire straits now.
I know, man. It's sad. Like he was when he got inducted into the Hall of Fame, he was still with it to a degree. I mean, he was, suffering a little bit, but he got inducted I want to say 1995, 1996, around that time, right?
Yeah,
And
something like that.
yeah, like there's photo, it's in the magazine. They show photos of him. He's there with his mom. He's like looking at his ring, whatever. But he's with it. Like he's able to like converse with other people, sign autographs, do all that stuff. It's awful to see the condition that he's in today. It's really really tragic.
Yeah.
And to think that he's probably in better shape or like in better conditions than what he was a few years ago is even still mind blowing because like he's it's bad and he's still young.
Yeah.
He
Well,
shouldn't be.
and his contemporaries, dude, like Hagler before he passed away was in great
Leonard,
shape. Leonard's in great shape. Durand fell out of good shape for a while, but now he's in good shape, pretty good shape. And all of them spoke very well, very clearly. We're doing fine. And so, I mean, you look at his contemporaries, and then you look at him. I mean, I think that you can definitely see what went wrong in the formula, for sure.
I think it was because he was taking punches from grown men at the age of 16 years old
Yep.
multiple
No,
times.
no, absolutely no question whatsoever. And in during years when I mean, fuck, dude, we're basically just making a case against boxing on the show. But during years when your brain's still developing,
Yeah.
your brain is not done growing yet. So suffering fucking concussions, mini concussions, not good, not super good. So whatever
But,
you're gonna do it safely.
but still, man, like regardless of all that, this was like Benitez at this point is 79. Like if you can watch these things, he was just brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And if you know, like I know a lot of people say like different fights. So you bring up, you be like, oh, what's the fight you would want your students to watch if you're trying to teach them certain things? We get a lot of Tony McCallum, very very valid, and other fights. And for whatever reason, I don't see a lot of people ever mention Leonard Benitez, but like you got to watch it. It's incredible. It's just the contrast, the styles, the feinting, the different things. They're trying to outthink each other the entire fight. And Leonard is clearly high wired to the highest point where he's forced to try to do the best he can. And I feel for Benitez too, because the fight was stopped in the last round. And you think, okay,
He
got
fights his ass off.
and there was literally only 6 seconds left. Like you didn't have to stop it at that point. He wasn't in dire straits where he was going to get knocked unconscious. You know?
Yeah, he would have been all right had they left it, but
Yeah.
he fought his ass off in it. And Leonard, you got to give Leonard credit, dude, because this is one of his biggest victories. And I mean, this was a fight where he pulled it out of his ass. Like, I mean, it wasn't like he was on the verge of losing per se, but it was a fight where he needed that separation and he needed to kind of step it up when he did, and he did.
And tell me if you agree with this. I don't think it's talked about enough anymore because maybe because it was his first title fight. Everybody brings up the Hagler fight, rightfully so. Everybody brings up the second Duran fight, you know, things like that. I don't hear enough talk about the, you know, his first win over, you know, his first title win over Benitez. It's just like it's confirmed and people talk about it sometimes, but like in terms of just like, you know, being added to the same kind of like no mas and such, it's not there. It never has.
I agree. No, I agree, dude. It's one of his biggest wins. Like as far as like being no controversy or no weird nothing, it's just a win. And it was before there you could talk about the training and all that type of stuff, but even so, Benitez was obviously still like he had not really started to slide at this point. He was still looking good. And so yeah, dude, I think that it's a really good win and underrated. Probably should be talked about more. That's why we talked about it today.
Absolutely. And that's why we're talking about it right now. So my question to you is, would you have paid the pay-per-view would you have paid the pay-per-view price for this today? If there was a double header, how much do you think it would have gone for?
Man, that should have been. They're trying to charge like $125 or something, dude. Guarantee for HD too. Come on.
For the double header like this,
shit,
it would at least be 100. You would think, right?
Yeah, or they would have tried to pull some bullshit where like to like a dual site or you know something like that, or two different shows. I don't know, man.
I don't know, man. Because again, like Hagler Antuofermo could hold its own, and Leonard Benitez obviously is a super fight on its own. I would think if you're gonna make a comparison today, right? I would say a close one would be, and I don't think it's on this level. I don't think it's on this level at all of what Leonard Benitez and Hagler Antuofermo was. But if you want to make a comparison, think about something like when Mayweather fought Canelo and then Danny Garcia fought.
That's a good one. Yeah, that's a good one. I was gonna go back a little bit. I think it was a little farther. Yeah, like 10 years before that. But like that's a good one. I was gonna say Morales Pacquiao and Arce Hussein.
Yes. Yeah, totally.
Because I remember going into that and being like, "Oh shit, this is gonna be some good shit," and it was. It was fucking. That was a fucking good ass pay-per-view. But yeah, like it just doesn't really happen. And that was a fucking pay-per-view, so it's not like you know.
Yeah.
So
but
yeah,
I remember when like that was on the Floyd Canelo undercard, right?
Danny, yeah, because I remember
well, it wasn't Chino, no, excuse me, it was Maidana, not Chino.
Or yeah, that shit was fucking good, dude.
No, not Maidana. Fuck, I just said Maidana. Excuse me, Matisse,
yeah.
Yeah,
Garcia Matisse, and that shit was like you know top 2 fighters at 140 after
that was a big fight that people clamored for. So yeah, that was a good pay-per-view. But I guess if you want to make a slight comparison, that would be something similar to that, where like you got the both fights where they're clearly they could be their own thing, and then they stacked it to that. But like Leonard Benitez and Hagler Antuofermo would just never be on the same card today. I'm sorry, this is never ever.
Well, yeah. You know, promoters, networks and whatnot, they've figured out a way to maximize like the profits by pretending that these fights, and I mean, dude, everybody's fucking guilty, some more than others, but pretending that these fights, and we've talked about it before, that are just normal fights, like contender versus contender, because one guy might have a belt, but he's not they're not the fucking champion. It's just 2 top fighters in a division. That's it. Not a super fight. but they treat it as if it's a super fight. And this fucking Saturday, and so every fight's a super fight, and they figured out a way to maximize this shit. So they wouldn't put two fights like that on the same card because they'd be like, well, why make fans happy when we could just line our pockets? So, I mean, and it's not to say they weren't looking to line their pockets back then. It's just that I think they had more accountability to a lot more entities than they do now. But anyway, that's its old other fucking podcast. So yeah, I would pay the fee though, dude, because that's a good card.
I totally would too, man. That's definitely not a streamable card for me. I would actually willingly pay the money for that.
I'd pay money for that.
And not, I would try, if I wasn't working it, I would try to be actually I would fly out for that, something like that, totally. Because that would be a good meetup for people, I think. Like if it happened today in 2022, everybody on boxing Twitter, or at least our friends, the people we're close with, would definitely want to be out for something like that. And it would be one of those memorable affairs where, unlike Crawford and Spence, which didn't take place, if it was taking place like that, I think everyone would be convening there, and it would be a beautiful affair.
I don't know, man. You flying out to Nebraska for Crawford Avanesian or?
Definitely not, man. Nebraska in what, December? Are you fucking kidding me?
Yeah, I'm not trying to go to Nebraska in December, January, February, March, April, man. Just go through the calendar.
Anywhere where I just know it's cold and it doesn't really get warm. All right. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm good. Nah, dude. It was an incredible doubleheader, especially in retrospect, and one that nobody really ever talks about. I mean, and a big part of that is how anticlimactic Hagler Antuofermo 1 ended. And even then, after that fight, a lot of people are calling Hagler the uncrowned champion. Who knows, dude? We never, at that point, nobody knew. Nobody knew that they were going to be meeting up years down the line. So it's a pretty underrated card for that reason as well.
Dude, it's one of those things that, like, if I could find a poster of it that would be affordable to me, I would love to own it and frame it. But unfortunately, that hasn't happened yet. So
yeah,
but
man.
I mean, it's just I like that's why we did the show today, though, because it was like it's a very important anniversary. There's a lot of history involved with the players involved, with the fighters involved, and what happened subsequently, and how they got there, and what happened afterwards, and how their careers intertwined. So that's why we're here, my friend.
You are that deal finder, though, dude. So, so I'm not counting you out on that one.
For shirts, okay, for shirts. Listen,
yeah. Well,
there's one before we head off. There's one shirt I'm looking for, man. There was like the whole Caesar's Palace logo. It was even before Leonard became champion, and it says on they had the Caesar's Palace thing, and it says Sugar Ray Leonard NABF champion on the bottom of it. If I have one of those, I will retire from the shirt game.
Have you even seen any for sale ever, and you just couldn't get them, or you just never seen them?
One. I saw one in the Ring magazine one time years ago, as like his brother was wearing it. Never seen it for sale.
Dude,
I have like 4 shirts that are my holy grails that I've seen in magazines that I'm hoping and praying one day will pop up somewhere. Or if I meet somebody and they say they have a huge collection of shit, but not yet.
Dude, and it's funny because I've been trying to find one of those fucking those old Ring posters that's like 120 years of heavyweight champions, like, and it has it's like the gold colored. Every so often they pop up, but usually in really shitty shape or like super overpriced. Because I'm looking at these motherfucking ads and it's like $4.95, bro. Don't do me like that, y'all. Come on, eBay. No, but it's no, it's a really cool event, dude. And I appreciate you. There wasn't really all that much homework because we've watched these fights and we know a lot of these stories already, but still a lot of fun, man. Thank you.
I had to talk about it. Absolutely, man. It's always a blast talking about that. And as always, if you listened, I hope you enjoyed it today.
Yeah, dude. I mean, I think if people are listening for history, they generally enjoy the history. So hopefully so. But if you did listen, and thank you, we do appreciate it. And whatever podcast apps you listen through, please subscribe and leave a rating. We appreciate that as well. And when it comes to watching on YouTube, thank you. And subscribe to that too. Leave us a comment, try to respond back. Social media wise, the Knuckles and Gloves podcast is on Facebook and Instagram, but also on that dying total piece of shit they call Twitter. So go and hook up with us there, but also individually we're there on the said dying piece of shit Twitter. That is not the person I'm about to name. just in case there's any ambiguity. Aris, go find Aris on Twitter as Punch Zone Aris. Me, Patrick Connor, go find me. There's Patrick M. Connor, and we'll talk to you soon. Aris, we will hook up, bro.
Be good, everyone.
Later, buddy.